Hey everyone, it's Greg with Spotted Tongue Woodworking, and I'm going to tell you a story that it takes several years. That first photo was when I first picked up this chunk of wood with my son, probably about 2 years old, little 2.5 years old, and I found that piece of wood on the side of the road, and I picked it up, threw it in the back of the van, and let it dry in my basement for several years. As it dried, it developed a significant crack and it warped. So trying to flatten out that warp, I took off the high spots with the planer, and to stick it on the CNCs, I had to take the table off the CNC because this chunk of wood was close to 4 inches thick, and I did not have that much travel in my Z-axis with the table in place. So I took the table off to begin flattening it, and I found the most efficient way to flatten this slab of wood was to start taking off down the high spots on the corners because it kind of dried out like a Pringle. And so we get it nice and flat. This was several days with many hours of CNC time. So we get that top side nice and flat. We're going to flip it over and we're going to do the same thing to the bottom. But with the bottom here, we're not going to flatten the whole thing. We're just going to flatten it enough to be able to secure the base to the bottom, because the way it was cut and how much material I would have to take off to flatten it is I wouldn't have much left. So after flattening a significant part of it and removing probably close to 3/4 to an inch off of the total thing, we're going to remove the bark using a hammer and chisel to get the most of it off. And from there, we're going to start using a variety of grinder attachments and drill attachments to clean up that, I believe it's the cambium layer. Yeah, please correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not so up to date with my plant and wood terminology. So we got everything cleaned up, and we're going to start preparing it for the epoxy pour. And the first thing is, because we will be using a colored epoxy and this is a light colored wood, we're going to seal the wood with a thinned out mix of tabletop epoxy. So mix up tabletop epoxy, add some lacquer thinner to it to thin it out, and we're just going to brush it on just to seal it so that the pigment does not soak into the wood. One thing I really liked about putting this initial layer of tabletop epoxy on the wood was that it really gave me an idea of what the color of the final wood would be. My wife saw it and she was not excited about how glossy it was, so I told her that that wasn't going to be it and that it was not going to be so glossy, so we had to make that happen. During the drying process, and it's very typical of oak woods, is that the significant pores, the medullary rays opened up, especially because it's next to the wood stove, as it got really dried out during the winter. So we're trying to fill in all those little cracks without flooding the whole piece of wood. So, I have 4 kids, so we've got a lot of the medicine droppers. So I use the medicine droppers to drop the epoxy into those cracks and try to fill those voids. Again, clean it up, sand it down, because we're going to try to fill this big crack right in the middle. My initial plan was to cut bow ties or some sort of decorative stitching or something to fill that gap, but my wife didn't want that, so here I am going to be trying to, one, not destroy this piece by dropping it and splitting it in half, but also trying to pour this epoxy in a very awkward space. So what I did is I made a dam using caulk, which I came to significantly regret afterwards, but caulk it to seal it, put that piece on the bottom with the tape to keep it from sticking to the epoxy. Alright, so poured it, had a few little leaks, had to re-caulk it, and I think it's holding, so I'm going to step away for 20 or 30 minutes, come back, check it, and see if everything is still holding. And if it is, I'll go to bed. Spoiler is, it did work out, and yeah, this was a big piece of wood. I kept trying not to drop it. So we got that off, flipped it over, took that board off the bottom, and you can see where the caulking kept the epoxy in place, but also made a huge mess. Not only did it make a huge mess that I had to try to clean off as carefully as I could, but after taking it off and I'm going to sand it down, what I came to realize was that caulking...
Oh, hold on. A little defeated by how this looks. I'm not sure if all the pigment settled to the bottom, so all those cool swoops and curves are underneath the bottom of this, so I'm gonna sand this down and hope for the best. We'll see.
Yeah, so that too. So the caulking made a mess, and life happened, and I stepped away from this project for several months. And during those several months, the seasons changed, the wood moved, the epoxy cracked, and I did my best to grind out that caulking. So pretty much not starting over, but trying to get the epoxy down, half an inch, just enough for me to pour a new layer over the top of it. So what we're going to do this time is, we got a nice elbow shot. I used some hot glue to make a small dam around, and to be able to pour a small pond of epoxy over the existing epoxy. It is, so not a very deep pour, so it'll dry fairly quickly and not, be too much of a challenge. And obviously, you saw that close-up is that crack along the opposite side. I had to refill that crack as well. There were just, epoxy is really interesting, is that it finds the tiniest cracks. So even though I'd sealed everything as good as I could, it did spill out just a little bit more. So now we got it out of my home shop and brought it to my big shop, the big shop that I rent from my mailman, which is a wonderful story I'll have to tell sometime. I brought it over to the big shop, and here we are doing another flood coat of tabletop epoxy just to seal it, because I'm going to be going back through and filling in more cracks and voids that popped up during this change of the season. So we're going to sand it down to get a nice smooth surface, and we're going to drill out these little voids where there was still a little bit of epoxy that I didn't quite get out the first time. So using a Dremel and a dental pick, which really made me really second guess my life choice of not becoming a dental assistant and realizing how fun that is to drill out cavities or whatever. Drilled that all out. We're going to fill in these last little spots with the epoxy, and anything after this we're just going to fill in with super glue, and we'll get to that later. So sand everything down to rough 80 grit just to get everything as uniform and flat and clean as we can. Yep, there's the super glue accelerator. Sand that all down again. There's going to be a lot of sanding there's been a lot of sanding in this whole project, but there's more sanding now than there was. So we got the top sanded down. Obviously you can see that the epoxy on the sides needs to be cleaned up as well. So we're back to, with the drill, with the nylon brush attachment, just cleaning it out, just spending time outside cleaning it because it makes a mess. My best kept secret that I think for odd shaped things, and you saw that, is the Surf Prep sponge pads. They make them compatible with Festool, which is great. So we sanded the sides, sanded the top down to 120, kind of like your standard grit. Bring it down to, for every woodworker's favorite finish, Rubio Monocoat, or as many people have come to say, Rubio 2-coat, because 1 coat is okay, but 2 coats of Rubio looks significantly better. So we're going to get that first coat on there. We're going to buff it on with this Brillo pad, and then buff it off with the blue rag and get a second coat on there and get that nice little sheen that you get from that 2 coats that you don't get from 1 coat. So we got that on the top, and now we're going to start working on the bottom. Again, this is a big piece of wood. I'm getting real tired of moving it around. And I guess this is the big reveal of the base. I got the base from Flowy Line Designs. I wanted something a little classier, a little more creative, a little more unique than your standard hairpin legs, and Flowy Line Designs absolutely has those options available. Instead of just bolting the base to the table, I decided to trace the foot, the imprint of where it attaches, route that in, and just really make it a nice, clean, non-visible attachment. And what we're going to try here is we're going to try burning the logo right into the center. I got a little heavy-handed with the burning, so sanded it back down a little bit, and the logo came out okay. And we're just going to put a coat of Rubio on the bottom, trying to seal this thing on all sides. Because this is an air-dried slab and not a kiln-dried slab, so there are different considerations to be made with how the wood will move in regards to changes in temperature. And I ended up using a new product on top of the Rubio Monocoat. Is not the Nano, which is really big and exciting that certain Blacktail Studio person uses. This is the Rubio Monocoat, the Sheen Plus. This is their version of an extra top coat that goes over their Rubio, that goes over the standard Rubio, and adds a little bit more of a sheen, a little bit more protection to the piece. So I saw that at my local Paul B hardware store, and I wanted to try it out, and I think it came out pretty nice. Really good sheen to it, really nice protection. The kids haven't destroyed the table yet, so that's a good touch. I love the contrast of the blue against that golden oak color. It's along with that very unique base. It's a very one-of-a-kind table that you're not going to find anywhere else. Hi Casey, can you say it again? What'd you say about it?
What'd I say?
Yeah.
It's awkward?
It's an awkward piece?
It's an awkward piece.
Yep. She'll come around. She, puts up with all of my crazy projects. But that's it. That table took, from start to finish, that was 3 years from that piece of wood to getting the table in place. And this is crazy how much can change during that time. So that's it. That's the project, start to finish. From when I got the wood till finishing the table we're at 3+ years into this project, and I'm glad it's done.